Dentist.
All right. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the very first edition of Gas Conversations with GPM. My name is Ebuka. Here at GPM, we are particular about giving businesses the tools that they need to be able to navigate the changing landscape. Usually, the tools that we provide are technological in nature. Now, whether it's hardware or software, or my personal favorite, data analysis. However, we also believe that it's important to give businesses insight into the changing landscape. So that's why we felt it was important to have conversations with industry experts and thought leaders to be able to help us better understand where we are as an industry, where we're going and the trends that are emerging, and the effects that these trends will have on businesses and on consumers. And to that effect, we have decided to regularly have discussions and conversations with industry experts. There's no better experts than our speaker today, Geoffrey Cann. Geoffrey is a management consultant with over 30 years experience. He has worked in companies across the world, from his home country in Canada to the US, Australia, China, Japan, and many other countries. He has also advised companies in many different fields, but his core passion is on advising companies in the oil and gas industry. And he has advised some of the major industry leaders, from Irving Oil, where he started his career, to Suncor, Husky Energy, and Shell Canada. He is also a he's a speaker who is highly sought after, speaking at conferences and events on digitalization, and he has a podcast titled Digital Oil and Gas, which can be found on most streaming platforms. He is a prolific teacher with a course on digital oil and gas on Udemy, and his course on Udemy has been enrolled by over 2,000 students. And I think he's going to tell us a bit more on that later on. He's also a writer with his blog on digital oil and gas, which he writes about developments in the field of oil and gas and technology. And of course, his book, which will be giving us a presentation on today, Bytes and Barrels, the digital transformation of oil and gas. He'll be giving us a brief presentation, about 30 minutes, after which we will go into question and answer session. So to that effect, we would like for you to join the conversation, drop your comments, your insights, and your questions. We will address them after the presentation. We would like for you to follow this conversation on social media with the hashtag Gas Conversations with GPM. So thank you once again for joining us this morning, Geoffrey. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure it's customary in Nigeria and Africa as it is in North America, as you always greet the speaker with a round of applause. So, there we are. All right, now coming to the stage. Thank you very much for extending to me the invitation to address you today. It is very early here, 7 o'clock in the morning. My dear spouse is still sleeping, and I promised her you guys would keep the noise level down so that she can stay and enjoy her rest. But what we're going to talk about today is the transformation that's underway in the oil and gas industry globally. And it's predicated on a number of major trends happening, decarbonization, energy diversification, the capital market constraints, the wave of digital change. And what I'm going to do today is walk you through the high-level, high touch points of my first book, which was called Bytes and Barrels. And so all you need to do to watch this presentation is just to go into Zoom and pin my screen to your to be the screen that you see, and that way you'll be able to follow along. My slides are all behind me, so that's how there's no screen share or anything like that with this presentation. So as I mentioned, this presentation is going to be about my first book called Bytes and Barrels. There's the cover. If you're looking for it online, you can find it on Amazon and iTunes and all kinds of other book selling places. Anything associated with Amazon globally carries it. My second book, which was published in March of last year, is called Machine Learning and Data Science in Oil and Gas. And it's more of a university textbook. It's quite expensive, and it's very much a deep dive into how to use artificial intelligence and machine learning tools in the industry. My third book is called Carbon Capital and the Cloud. It's going to be published next month in March, and it'll take its time to roll out around the world. And it will be an exploration of decarbonization, digital innovation, capital market constraints, and how those are coming together to create new opportunities in the industry. Now, if you want to follow along with or track me down on social media, these are my various places where you can find me at Geoffrey Cann, or you can visit my website, geoffreycann.com. I also have as you've heard, a podcast called Digital Oil and Gas, and I've started a new video series called Energy Innovations. It will go live in March and will be hosted by a company called Energy Now Media for you to watch that. And now here's the sort of the high level storyline I want to talk about today. What is digital? So provide some definitions. What are the building blocks that oil and gas is using to construct its digital future? How does the value chain in oil and gas reacting and participating in the digital transformation? What are the leadership challenges if you're in the industry and you want to get ahead of this? What are the challenges you're likely to face? And then how do you go about setting a game plan or a strategy in the industry so that you can embrace these tools to help transform your business? Now, it turns out that these digital tools are one of the very few tools that tackle a number of social and industrial problems at the same time. So the International Energy Agency forecasted that digital innovations could expand oil and gas reserves globally by as much as 5%. That's 500 billion barrels of oil equivalent. It's worth $22 trillion. So, if you're interested in wealth capture, that's a pretty good number to think about, 22 trillion. So it's quite a value release by applying digital to reserves. Now, for those countries that don't have reserves, then this obviously does not apply. But what it does suggest is that digital applied to the reserves can expand the reserves position, which should provide for things like reduction in the price of commodities. The second effect is demand impacts. We don't know how this is going to play out, but as we add electrification into transportation, we should see a demand reduction. But the models are not clear as to whether demand will actually go up or go down. So keeping an eye on that one. So for everybody else in the industry, if you're not a producer and you don't make cars, you've got only two levers that you can pull, three levers in effect. The first one is productivity. Digital innovations in oil and gas, it doesn't matter where you are in the value chain, from a retailer to a product distributor to a explorationist, a production company, an oil refinery, a gas plant, doesn't matter. Digital unlocks 20% productivity boosts at a minimum. So there's the prize, 20% on productivity. And there's another boost of cost reduction. Again, doesn't matter where you are in the value chain, you'll get a 20% cost reduction through digital. And then the new lever, which is now coming to the fore, is decarbonization and the measurement of carbon, tracking carbon, and trading carbon. So it's the ESG lever. And this applies not just to oil and gas, but all of these other industries just above me. So logistics, and the whole energy sector, construction, all of these sectors are experiencing the exact same phenomenon, which is these dramatic productivity and cost improvements. So it doesn't matter where you are in the chain, you've got an opportunity. Which brings us to this question, well, what is digital and what is that? So I looked around when I was putting my book together to find some definitions, and this is the one that I like. It's from the International Energy Agency in Paris, and they don't really sell anything. They're just an advisor. So, you always have to be suspicious. If someone is selling you something, their definition is going to be, set so that it encourages you to buy what they're selling. So you have to be very careful with definitions. But the IEA's definition is a good one. And it says that something that is digital has to bring together three things. It has to combine data, has to combine analytics or computational horsepower, compute, and it has to have some connectivity so that it can connect. And an Apple Watch like this one's a really good example. It has data, my address book. It can do calculations because it actually has a calculator right on the watch, and it's got connectivity. It talks to my phone and Wi-Fi. And Cisco in their research identified that anything that could be digitized will be digitized because the cost of the chips that make data analytics and connectivity are falling in price, and to a point where they're practically throwaway items now. And so anything that can be digitized or you can add digital to will have digital added to it. And that includes things, products, services, and business models. And this brings us to two fundamental laws about digital change, which do not exist in oil and gas. If you're in the oil and gas industry, these laws don't exist, but they absolutely exist in the digital world. And so oil and gas people need to start to think about these laws in their day-to-day. So the first of these is Moore's Law. And we've all heard about Moore's Law now in the virus with the pandemic, things that grow virally, that's Moore's Law. But in business terms, that translates to a 40% compounded annual growth rate. Now, there is only one business that I'm aware of that has grown by 40% compounded through its entire lifespan, and that's Amazon. And Amazon is the prototypical digital company. That's Moore's Law. And the reason why Moore's Law is really important is because the cost of chips is behaving according to Moore's Law, and the digital devices grow at the pace of Moore's Law. They either 40% compounded in either cost or productivity gains or capability. The second law, which many people don't pay as much attention to, is Metcalfe's Law. And Metcalfe was a researcher at the time of Margaret Thatcher's government in the UK, and his task was to figure out the value of British Telecom so that Margaret could sell it. That was her goal in the 1970s, sell off these government agencies. And his research shows that a network asset is worth n squared, where n is the number of devices on your network. So for a phone company, it's the number of phones. For a Tesla, it's the number of Tesla cars on the road. For a oil company, it might be the number of oil rigs. For gas distribution companies, it might be the number of tanks that are out in distribution in the marketplace. If you can connect them up to create a network, you can capture what are called network effects. And the network effect translates to n squared. So if you have a network with 5,000 items on it, and you can figure out that the value of a specific item is, say, $10, the value of your 5,000 is n squared times 5,000. So it can be worth a lot of money as you start to grow your networks. And that's why you look at these fast growth digital companies. Why are they worth so much? It's because the market says they're worth n squared. And so the key is grow as fast as possible to get n as big as you possibly can make it. You can see this in the capital market effects. Here's I'll just show you some data here. This is market cap and revenue across the last few years. If you go back to 2002 and you look at the largest companies in the world by market cap, you have a nice mix. Microsoft, ExxonMobil, number 2, and then some industrial companies, 3, 4, and 5. And if you looked at it by revenue, it was also interesting. You had Walmart, ExxonMobil number 2, BP number 4, and 2 industrial companies, GE and Ford. Let's fast forward to 2021. And here's what you see. The largest companies by market cap now are all digital. And they're not $100 billion companies. They're $3 trillion companies. Like capital markets have gone crazy in valuing these businesses. The only energy company in there is Saudi Aramco, and that's because they've publicly floated a piece of their business. If you looked at it on a revenue basis, though, here's what you see. Only Amazon cracks the top list. And 3 of the largest companies in the world by revenue, cash, are energy concerns. So what's happening is capital markets are saying, we're going to put our money where there is a digital story. You can now see the opportunity here. There are no energy companies with a digital story. And so the opportunity to capture a place in the market, an energy company with a strong digital story, is pretty compelling because their energy companies are cash rich. So there's the prize, is to kind of figure this out. Now, let me give you a quick framework for how digital gets done. And I call this, should be able to draw this on the back of a napkin. But how digital gets done, how you stitch this together is this is a model with 3 layers. The first layer is called the digital core. And the digital core is unique to companies. It creates your signature way of doing business. And it starts with data. You need a very, very strong and good understanding of the data of your business. The Internet of Things is what generates the data. Artificial intelligence and machine learning tools interpret your data, and robots apply the data. Now you have to think about Elon Musk and Tesla here to give you a very crisp picture of this. He's created a vehicle. The vehicle is covered with Internet of Things sensors, LiDAR cameras. He has on board the car an artificial intelligence computer that's processing all this data. And he's creating automated driving. And his company is now worth as much as the next 6 auto companies combined. The next 6 auto companies combined. And this formula is not unique to Tesla. Anyone who has a network type business, which is in a position to replicate this exact same model, particularly where in an industry we don't actually have similar companies prosecuting this concept. Now, this is a start, but it's not sufficient. Underneath that, you need what are called digital foundations. This only works if you are on cloud computing. It doesn't work because you can't extract value from Metcalf unless you have the network effect. And for that to work, you have to be on cloud computing. So you need cloud computing. The next key technology is blockchain, because blockchain is what creates trust over the data, the things, and the computations and the robots. And then last but not least is some fundamental tool sets that companies now all need to have just to survive, which is enterprise systems, platforms to provide for market effects, and cybersecurity. It's very, very critical. And if you do these 2 layers, what I call digital core, digital foundations, you can purchase digital and you can kind of do digital. But if you want to be digital, the challenge now is how do you get your people to be able to embrace these tools at the same pace that the tools themselves are evolving? And that's called the need for a business capacity to be digital, new ways of working. And that includes techniques called like agile and thinking about how you adapt your business in a very fast way. And of course, change management, helping your people cope with the amount of change you're going to throw at them. Digital companies excel at this. Now, the next question people ask, well, that's great. When is this going to come to oil and gas? And the effect on oil and gas is shown here. Let me just go back. I call this the kind of fuse and bang. The digital has a fuse. In other words, if you think about it like a stick of gunpowder, there's a fuse, and the fuse can either be short. In other words, you don't have much time to react, or the fuse can be very long. It can take a long time for the fuse to kind of burn out, or the fuse can be or somewhere in between. And what drives the fuse is things like the pandemic response. In the pandemic, the fuse has shortened. Oil and gas companies are telling me now that what they would typically plan to do over 20 years, they now do in 20 months. So the pandemic has dramatically shortened the fuse across oil companies. They've gotten a lot more competitive because they discovered during the pandemic that it was these digital tools that let them survive. So pandemic has had a big effect on the length of the fuse. And then it's things like industry mindset. Do you have an attitude towards change? How competitive is your sector? More competitive sectors react to digital and are moving more quickly. How mature is the technology? Cloud now is so mature. Oil and gas companies tell me in my new book, they're telling me that cloud isn't even a thing anymore. It's just assumed you have this. So if once the technologies reach a maturity, the fuse gets very, very short. And then, of course, can you tie it into your existing business? Is there people available to work with the technology? And relates directly to school systems. They have to also adapt to create the right talent. And then finally, how fast and how quickly can you roll the technology into your business, the speed of adoption. And of course, then what's the effect? So if that tells me how fast it's going to happen, so what's the impact that it's going to have on me? And this is related to whether you affect your balance sheet or your income statement. If you affect your balance sheet, you add reserves in oil and gas terms, as one example, the effect is enormous, enormous. If you're impacting the income statement, it might be quite a bit less. In other words, you're just reducing your cost. So balance sheet or income effect is critical to understand where these technologies play. Whether you unlock new business models is another critical one. Is what you're doing creating a new business model? If you look at Uber and auto share, that utterly transformed the taxi industry globally, and it affected balance sheets because the taxi was no longer owned by a company, but it was owned by the individual driver. So that changed companies' balance sheets overnight, and it destroyed all kinds of taxi businesses. Creation of a new business model, really key. Can you consolidate or do a roll-up or acquire companies? That also has a significant effect. And can you strand assets or create whole new assets? The new assets being created, financial assets, crypto assets, carbon as an asset. Now, we don't think about carbon as an asset. We think that's something you just emit into the air. But carbon as an asset is suddenly becoming a thing. Carbon credits. How can you create a value through the new business model, these new digital tools? Now, depending on where you're at in the industry, your effect is going to vary. So let me show you how this works across the value chain. So this is a little 2x2 matrix. I used to be a consultant. Thank you for calling that out. I don't do consulting anymore. Too many conflicts of interest because I work across so many companies. I teach so many people these ideas. So I don't do consulting anymore because of the conflict of interest problems. But this is my consulting side coming out. This is a little 2x2 matrix, as you can see. So I have the bang on the vertical axis and the fuse on the lower axis. And so what this shows you, if you're in the upper left-hand corner of this chart, the impact is very big on your industry, and the fuse is very short. In other words, it's here, it's happening. And so where is this? Technology companies, obviously, they have to move to the cloud. They have to embrace mobile computing and devices. So the impact for them is very, very big, and they have to move very, very quickly. Inside oil and gas companies, the support functions, finance, human resources, purchasing and supply chain, they then feel this because their world is largely involving manipulation of information and data. And it's very easy to embrace these digital tools if your world is already information centric. Like you don't have to deal with assets, then you don't have to drill holes and pour cement. You don't have to drive a vehicle. Like the minute you are working strictly with data, you can embrace change quickly. So the support functions. Then the services industries. This is doing companies that do operation, maintenance, repair, painting, well services, equipment services. Then companies that are involved with turnarounds, particularly for refineries, facilities and plants. And the reason for that is because their turnarounds are very service driven, and they're very sensitive to improvements in work scheduling and work optimization yield big productivity and cost gains. Capital projects for construction, retail. This is gasoline stations for cars, and the reason why this is, the impact is not as great and the fuse is quite a bit longer is because we will have a very slow rollout of electrification of vehicles. I would put gas distribution, bottle gas, in the category of impact by retail. And the bottles themselves, the canisters you sell your gas in, your LPGs, those bottles last quite a while. Like they're not forever. They eventually wear out. But if you when you replace the bottles, it creates the opportunity to figure out how to make them into a digital thing. And so you'll have to let the bottles run their way to the end of life. But as you replace them, you can make them smarter. And so that's why it takes a little bit of time for that to happen. And the bang is not going to be as big initially. And then for other parts of the industry, production, exploration, processing, and refining, because these are running assets 24/7, they're steel and cement, they are going to feel the effect of digital much more slowly. Now, I did mention there was a bunch of new business models already emerging. Let me just quickly touch on them. Using AI solutions in the cloud. This creates all kinds of ways to improve valuations. It's specifically for upstream oil and gas companies. If you have all kinds of seismic data about your reserves and you put it into the cloud and you use AI to interpret the data, you can create new value. So that might not apply in your case, but absolutely applies in producing nations. This is one that could apply, is fuel delivery, mobile fuel delivery. How do you transform and rethink fuel delivery using digital innovation? In North America, there's a big concern that convenience stores are going to disappear because a fuel delivery directly to the vehicle means you don't have to take the vehicle to the gasoline station. Next one is blockchain. Blockchain on vehicles will create all kinds of new experiences. And the linkage here is any mobile asset could become an entity on a blockchain structure. Subscription services. Instead of taking a current business construct, which is you have to purchase, you turn it into a subscription. This transforms balance sheets. Commercial data creates new, on blockchain creates new financial assets. This is cryptocurrencies, carbon as a non-fungible token on a blockchain asset. That's a whole new way of thinking about assets that carbon credits, which become a new interesting financial asset. That's real. And then using Tesla's model of artificial intelligence plus robots, you can change industrial cost structures. And that's also coming. So new business models, they're quite real. Like people in oil and gas say to me, oh, that's never going to happen. Our industry's been around for 100 years. Like, why would? No, it's quite real. If you look carefully, you can see these models starting to emerge. Now, if you were targeting your business and thinking about where might you invest, this is where I would kind of help draw a line. I would say the front office, the operational side of your business, it tends to be quite rich in opportunity. And so the place where people get benefit is improved utilization of assets, cost reduction. And the challenge, of course, it's logistically challenging when you're trying to change things like trucks and plants and facilities and loading docks and loading arms, et cetera, et cetera. It's costly and it's challenging, and it can be quite expensive, but the prize is huge. That's where the money is in the front office. The trade-off is in the back office. It's much faster because people are already dealing with paper and digital assets. So you can change the back office much faster. You can automate paperwork, use blockchain on smart contracts. It can be as a kind of deployments much less expensive. And there's some change management challenges here because you're dealing with professionals. But in oil and gas, what the oil and gas companies are telling me is this back office transformation with digital is a complete no-brainer. It's the simplest, fastest decision the CFO can make, is to deploy in the back office. Now, there's the way digital works. I mentioned that if you want to be digital, you have to transform your way of thinking here. So let me show you how this changes in how we need to be thinking differently. The traditional way in oil and gas is what's called waterfall methodology. We cascade from a requirements definition, we then develop our physical asset, and then we commission it. And the problem is, this is a very precise process, but it is very slow. It takes a very long time, 4 to 5 years sometimes. Agile works very differently. Agile, you create a time limit around a task to be done, and you then send your developers over to go and work on it. And they create a minimum viable version of your solution, and then you send it back and you iterate. And here you're doing speed over precision. You're moving faster. Precision isn't as critical. This works really well with digital. And so the digital world embraces this thinking. And the question for oil and gas is, where can we apply this thinking in oil and gas? Can you apply it to, is it just digital or is it in many other fields? just this month, McKinsey published a very important article where they said this agile thinking works all over the place in oil and gas. It's not just in digital areas, but engineering projects, in design workshops, in supply chain, all kinds of places can embrace this tool. Which then creates the question: well, what happens to people in the future? And I get asked regularly, if I'm hiring for the future, what am I looking for now? And I tell people, well, the talent of the future is going to have this profile. You're going to be looking for people who are able to learn quickly, who have good judgment, who have the leadership skills, they're creative, they're problem solvers, they like working in teams. These skills, digital can't replicate. So your skill set of the future looks more and more like this, and less of traditional hard skill, like things that people just do routinely and repetitively. Those tasks are going to be taken away by machines. Now, I wanted to just quickly touch on cyber because it's a big issue. I know you probably saw the news of Colonial Pipeline being hacked, and it shut down the oil industry in the U.S. on the eastern seaboard for several days. Cyber activity is very, very serious. And in the downstream, this is like people taking your identity. But if we add sensors and devices in oil and gas to collect our data, what we're doing is we're creating more place for criminals to attack, more places for attack. So what we need to do is, at the same time as you're doing anything and introducing these digital devices, you have to be always thinking about how could this be attacked or hacked. And the old ways of doing things, air gapping them and the like, are no longer viable because you can sniff out or listen on the airwaves to catch the unencrypted data that's going by. And there's just going to be a lot of these out there that are available. So we have to start thinking about how do we do stuff like authentication and authorization, which we do when we log on to systems. How do we do that now for equipment? And this is a strength of most IT departments. This is something they're really, really good at. And our industrial people, operations professionals, rubbish. We never had to worry about this. Now suddenly we have to worry about this. It's a big deal. So this is where the folks who work in operations need to work very closely with people who are professionals in cyber and in the commercial world. And so this brings me to almost to the end. Like, how do we advance? What do you do? And I tell companies today, you need to set what I call a North Star heading. When Christopher Columbus was searching for new worlds in the 1400s, he couldn't see over the horizon. But what he could see was the stars. So he navigated according to the North Star. Digital is like that. We can't predict where it's going. So all you can do is set a distant heading and aim for that heading, and hopefully you'll navigate your way to it. So long-term goals. I tell companies, think about something which is very advanced, but still acceptable. And people can visualize robotic cars. We've been talking about that for 70 years. So it's acceptable to talk about robotic cars. And so we pour money into that. You have to think about your business. What would society accept? And that should be part of your North Star heading. Things that are rational, but infeasible today. That's what you should be aiming for. And companies in North America, they're aiming for 90% productivity boosts, not 20%, 90%. That's how much of the scale. The measurable effect is 20% so far. But when companies are really targeting these things now, they aim for a 90% shift. Now, I hear lots of excuses about digital, just run them by them because this is always good fun. We tried that, it didn't work, so we're not going to try that again. So you have people who will say that. Another one is, well, this is not a priority for us. Like we got other issues here we deal with. It's not a priority. So you don't want to wait. If you're a retailer and Amazon was coming and you waited, you're hooped. Amazon's destroyed your business. So it might not be a priority, but it might become a serious threat. Another one is my data is my data. I'm not sharing my data. Why would I do that? Not a good idea in digital. Another excuse. This isn't our core business. You're listening to a consultant from North America tell you about this stuff. It's just consultant speak. We can ignore this. Like, it's just hype. Just hype. Remember all those IT projects and stuff we used to do, how they're always late and over budget and don't work? Yeah, this is just going to be more of the same. That's another good excuse. Another one, don't worry, this is just a fad. Something else will come along. So just ignore this. This is just it'll fade, it'll go away. Or a typical one from boards, I don't understand digital, and since I don't understand it, it doesn't apply to us. Like, we know our business and we don't understand this, so this doesn't apply. It's a false logic. Here's another fun one. I use Excel, and so I must be digital. Yes, after all, I'm using spreadsheets. That's digital, right? So I can ignore all this other stuff because I'm already digital. Excel's 40 years old. It's not built for this world. And then in my case, I'm 61. My birthday was in January. I retire in just 3 years. Why would I care about this? I'll let somebody else fight this fight. The common excuse. So let me wrap up here because we're just at the end of my my 25 minutes, 30 minutes. It's not too late to get started is really the story here. There's still time. So the first step is to set that distant heading, like where do you want to go? Next is you've got to educate your organization. Why is my course selling 22,000 students? It's because big oil companies are saying to their people, you've got to get up to speed on this. And we need a fast, cheap way to get our people smarter. So you got to educate your organization. No amount of effort, investment into some digital innovation is going to work if your people won't accept it because they don't get it, like what you're trying to do. So you got to educate. Next, you need that roadmap that's going to navigate your way so you don't misspend your money. And then because data is so critical to all of this, it's the centerpiece, it's the big fat box in the middle of the framework, you need to raise your data smarts and get smarter on data. And that's a big ask, but it's really important. And then last but not least, there's those foundations I talked about. Those have to be in place. All right, there we are. That's a quick run through of 80,000 words of my book. We did all that in 30 minutes. So there's the story in a nutshell. I just wanted to leave you with this one final thought before we go over to questions. My new book is coming out, as I mentioned, in March. If you just click that QR code, you can get I'll send you an alert when it's being published and hitting the market, so they can go looking for it. So that's your QR code. And now let's turn over for Q&A. And as ever, thank you very much. All right.
Thank you so much, Geoffrey. Thank you so much. We love, there's so much to unpack there. We've gotten some questions, but like I said earlier, we really love the book, Bytes and Barrels, and it's we make everybody in our team read it. It's required reading for our team. So we already have a few questions before we get into some of the audience questions. Yeah. The first thing is, you mentioned in the introduction of your book that you need to revise your findings in a few years. Now, yes. It's been 4 years, and since then, obviously, there's even been a pandemic, like you mentioned. So yes. What are the revisions or new findings that you've made since then?
Well, first of all, I had forecasted just in the absence of a pandemic and a real driver for change, my forecast was that the industry would take a lot longer to embrace these changes than it has. The entire timeline has accelerated, and the industry around the world has realized now that it is these digital tools that both help them survive during the pandemic, but have also helped them lower their costs and improve their productivity. They didn't anticipate that. Even though the research said, if you do this, you're going to improve your productivity and your cost structure, show me the money. Show me the money. I want to see the proof. Well, the pandemic proved it. That's the key. And so now they've gotten the proof that this stuff actually works. It's fast. You can do it during pandemic effects because you can enable these changes because they are digital in nature. You don't need to have people working close together in an unsafe way in a pandemic. And so the whole timeline has shifted. That's been a major change. Second major change is the whole machine learning, artificial intelligence wave. That actually has moved much faster than I was expecting. I would have thought the growth in the Internet of Things would have been faster. But the reality is these AI tools are so much easier to use than they used to be, that it's actually growing much faster than I anticipated. But those would be two changes I would highlight straight away.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We also were wondering, because like you mentioned earlier, the cost of digital have actually gone down, and
Dramatically, yeah.
dramatically, yes. But for us in like the developing world, a lot of these costs are still out of reach. So, for example, you mentioned implementing digital in things like LPG bottles. How do you get businesses in the developing world like ours to embrace the need for digital in things like in their front office operation?
Yeah. Well, this is, I don't have an answer. If I had the answer, I would write a book about that. I don't have the answer for that, unfortunately. What I know is that the back office is faster and cheaper, and you get 20% productivity boost and 20% cost reduction. So if the capital constraint is there, and in your situation, replacing all those bottles with smart bottles may be problematic. But the potential to embrace those tools in the back office, I think, is something that is actually well within reach. It doesn't require hard capital assets. It's just brain power. And I do know that at least in depending on what part of Africa you're in, the countries, and I'm going to guess here, but just based on what I read, so don't take me don't be too hard on me here. But I've been personally contacted repeatedly by people from Nigeria with great ideas about innovations they would love to bring to oil and gas, asking me, how do I do this? So you've got a group, a population, educated, interested, highly motivated, want to help, and are looking for opportunities to do so. So I think this is again, it's back to mindset. It's a mindset issue.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully we'll develop the right mindset to implement a lot of these changes.
And the mindset is not, it's not in the young people and entrepreneurs. They get it. It's the mindset of the managers and supervisors in oil and gas, in the distribution companies. That's the mindset that needs to change. And that's the whole purpose of my new book, is to talk about how do you change that mindset.
Okay. That's interesting. I'm really looking forward to reading the new book when it comes out.
Yeah.
We wanted to take a question from the audience. It says, I'm a trade lawyer who led negotiations for the e-commerce at the WTO.
Yep.
What is the government's role in the transformation to digital? And what should African companies ask of their government?
Yes, it's really interesting. So in the government's case, I don't know anything at all about your local government. What I do know is that in governments in general are often those who provide the policy that enables change to happen. And some policies are things like we offer accelerated tax benefits for hard assets like steel and cement, but we don't offer any tax benefit at all for companies that want to trial something that's digital. And so what governments need to do is look at their policies that provide the motivation to companies to invest and make change happen, which is often based on tax deductions, tax policies, hiring, these sorts of things, and should create the right policy structures and policy frameworks that encourages companies to invest. For instance, if you have a rule in your government that says you can't lay people off, this is a rule in France as an example. France says to their companies, you can invest all you want, but you cannot lay people off. So this creates a disincentive to investing in innovations that are either productivity boosts or cost reductions. Why would you? If people are the costs that you're trying to redirect, why would you make the investment? So this is a government rule, and this is where the government policy changes need to be mindful. If you wish to embrace change in these economies, you're going to have to look at these rules that constrain business appetite to invest. And that's just one simple example. And we can go on about, well, is digital actually a job killer or is it a job maker? And so far, the evidence is that it's a job maker. The countries that adopt robots and automation are all short on labor. And the reason is because there are things like robots increase the quality so high and make business so efficient that the costs come down. Suddenly you're more competitive. Now you want to grow your business. Then you look around and go, there's no people. I can't hire anybody. So it's what data is telling us is that these innovations are actually job growers, not job shrinkers. And if you have a government that thinks automation is about job reduction, then this is where your government has a role to play in rethinking its policy frameworks.
That's really interesting. I think you're right, because a lot of these innovations really open up new markets and new assets classes for businesses to go into. So I think it's definitely a net positive. One of the questions again that we have is about data. Now you mentioned, data is a very key element of digital, digital core. So we have two questions on data. The first is, how do businesses ensure and maintain the accuracy of the data or the quality of the data that they collect? And then the second is also, how do businesses, because a lot of businesses are very protective of their data. And also, like you mentioned, there are a lot of threats in cyber from moving on to these new platforms. So how do businesses protect themselves as they navigate this change into digital?
Yep. So the first, there's two questions there. So first on data, one of the key ways to improve the quality of data is to remove the manual data capture that takes place. In other words, if you have someone whose job is to go look at a gauge, and it'll, little arm saying, well, the tank is full, or it's 2/3 full, or it's got 12 pounds in it, or whatever that gauge says. And they even write that down on a piece of paper, and then that piece of paper goes to somebody who hands it to you. Okay, so there's your first opportunity right away. How do you use a smartphone and a camera, for instance, to take a photograph of that and then use an artificial intelligence tool to then read the gauge and then automatically create the data? So your people stop the pencil and paper nonsense. If you just went through your business and looked at all those points where original raw data is being captured and there's fingers touching it, find ways to make that less finger sensitive. Make it machine read. There's step one. Just start there. And you don't have to do it for all data. Like if you stare at all of your data and kind of go, this is such a huge problem, you would never do it. That's why you really stare at the data that really matters. So if what really matters for your business is how much gas is in that bottle, and that data is being manually captured, what I would recommend is you look at just that process. How do I take that single process and make that bit of data just that much better? That will then flow through to billings, flow through to collections, flow to the customer relationship, flow through to inventory management, flow through deliveries. That data becomes much higher quality and then improves all of those other processes. You don't have to do all of the data. A lot of people in oil and gas kind of go all or nothing. It's got to be all perfect, or no. Just concentrate on what really matters to your business, and then that will make a big difference. So that's on the data side. Now, on the cyber side, one of the secrets to cyber security is cloud computing. All the big cloud companies, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, they all talk. A threat to one is a threat to all of them. So the minute they find a threat that's coming in one of their data centers, they quickly go and tell all of the other data centers. That's their Metcalfe's law when you think about it. They sort of tell everybody. It's a network. If you're not doing that, and you're just kind of by yourself, you're off, you're doing your own thing, you're not able to take advantage of the fact that these big companies are much smarter and faster at this sort of thing than any small company would be. So one of the keys is for cyber is certainly train and educate your people so that you reduce the threat, but then you work very closely with companies that are specialists in these areas. They're the ones that can support you the best. I'm actually going to be running a cyber webinar in end of March. So if you go visit my website, my appearance page, you'll see an announcement about a cyber thing, and I would attend that one because they're going to talk specifically about how do you get ahead of cyber issues.
Great. Thank you so much for the answers. We have another question
Yeah.
where someone was asking, how can we measure ROI one can get from something like a digital twin without fully making an investment and spending on software?
Yeah, that's a really challenging question, actually. So it depends on what you're doing a digital twin of. So that's a first step. Second is the data that goes into your digital twin. If it's not reliable or not good quality, your digital twin's not going to be very good. So it may have struggle with trying to provide valuable insights for you. So the looking at a specific situation, being able to draw carefully, well, this is how I'm going to get to my ROI, is very, very, very tricky indeed. I don't have a method that I could share that I would say. What I can say, though, is the experience of those companies who have gone before you, who have invested in the digital twin, particularly if they're starting from a similar place. In other words, very disparate systems, unintegrated, lots of manual processes to kind of stitch together operational data, financial data, and the like to get to answers. Many of those companies will tell you that the impact has been far beyond what they ever thought possible from a digital twin technology. Now, that doesn't make it a leap of faith, like you should just do it because you should. But there's enough built up evidence from companies that are doing this that says that if you do not have a digital version of your asset, somewhere down the road, you will be at a significant disadvantage because those who are building these digital versions of physical assets are racing ahead. So it's not to say I don't know how you'd calculate it, but I do know it's like one of those things. It's like, what's the ROI of a car when you are riding a horse? Well, if your business is perfectly suited to riding a horse, well, you ride a horse and you're fine. You don't need a car. But eventually, owning the horse becomes a problem because you're the only one.
Totally agree. Somebody, Pleogas on Twitter says,
"Oh yes,
please share the link to your course and tell us how to reach Geoffrey." And I think that would be, the end of our, as you answer that, as we bring the Q&A session to a close. So please.
Yep. So the way to get to the course, it's on Udemy. And so in Udemy, I'll just put this into the chat box. The company is called Udemy. And if you just look for the course, which is called Digital Oil and Gas, it should pop right up. One of the things, the course is going to be pricey, I have to tell you, but Udemy frequently discounts the course. And the companies that do purchase it in volume are doing something using a service called Udemy for Business. And what Udemy for Business is you sign an arrangement with Udemy, and you then get to put as many of your people through as many of courses as you want on a sort of a per seat basis. So it's a dramatically cheaper way to take the training than it is to kind of just go buy the course. So that would be most of the students who are taking the course, the companies have put an arrangement in place with Udemy so that they can create digital analysts or digital citizens, call them citizen digital analysts. That would be a solution.
Okay. If you could also, tell, because some people may not have caught the start of your talk when you talked about your, how to get in touch with you and your platforms and things like that. So if you
let me just go back to that slide and I'll just pull that one back up on the screen here.
All right.
Because I can do that sort of thing. There's my, over here. There's my contact details. As I say, the easiest way to find me is just by name, Geoffrey Cann. Geoffrey, English version of Geoffrey, not the American, the English version, and it means salt of the earth. There you go. And yes, that's how you can find me. Just look for me by name, and I should pop up on your search list.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you. We promised to get you out of here before 8 o'clock your time. So you've come.
I have a dental appointment.
Thank you so much for the time you spent with us today. Well, we really appreciate it. We really appreciate all the insights and all the advice that you've given to us on digital transformation in the oil and gas sector.
Brilliant.
For anyone out there, you can reach out to him at Geoffrey Cann. He's a lovely man. He will respond. And for us on our part at GPM Africa, if you want to find out more about us, just visit our website at www.gpmafrica.com or follow us on social media. We are active on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at GPM Africa. Thank you once again for joining us today. Thank you, Geoffrey, so much for your time. Thank you for waking up so early. Have a lovely day.
All right. And we'll play out with some music, right?
Yeah, great.
All right.